Job chapter 8 and verse 8. For inquire, I pray thee, of the former age, and prepare thyself to the search of their fathers. Shalom, brothers and sisters. This is your brother Hawayala. I want to give all glory and praises to our Heavenly Father, and we do so in the name of our Lord and Savior Yahawashi. Grace and mercy to the hopeful elect scattered throughout the four corners of the earth that are waiting on the second coming of our Lord and Savior Yahawashi HaMashiach. Today we're going to look into some icons. I actually have a series that I've done over the years concerning icons. And what this is basically just imagery of what was shown during the time of the Middle Ages compared to what we're being shown today. One of the reasons why we do this is just to show, that, some of the things that actually were going on, before our time, and just looking back on a perspective of, a global perspective of where we're at today and some of the things that we've been told about history. And one thing about pictures speak a thousand words. And when you see a picture or you see pictures that are basically depicting, when you see pictures that are depicting another set of people compared to those that are currently there, it begs the question of who are those people that were there in time past and who are these people that are there now. This is a very, very big thing when it comes to history, because one of the beliefs in history that people, have in their mind is that a people that are in one place have always been there. So it's very hard for people to disassociate what they think in their mind when they think of a set of people in a particular region, and always thinking that either they were always there or they were always the only ones there in that particular region. And that's far from the case. In fact, if you look over the years, you'll notice that there are migration patterns that occur even in the ancient world, which is one of the things that's hard for people to understand, because in today's time they can understand a set of people from a particular nation or country coming to another place. For example, people coming from China moving to USA, or people moving from India to England. Those things they can accept. They can accept, someone from the Caribbean moving to New York City, but they can't understand people moving around to other places to either to find better opportunities or really to run away from a situation that is more dire than where they're going. So one of the things of the Icon series is that it shows, what was really going on during the Middle Ages. One of the things about the Middle Ages is that there was paintings, a lot of which were preserved, some of them which were destroyed through a process known as iconoclasm during what was known as the Renaissance period. And one of the things about the Renaissance period is that the Renaissance period focused on destroying images. That's what iconoclasm means. Iconoclasm means breaking of images. And we're going to go into this. This is actually, land backing off of the Gog and Magog lesson. This is almost like a spin-off lesson, because as I was, going about doing my research, searching things, I ran into something that made me say, I got to eventually do this lesson, but I couldn't add it into that particular lesson because it had really nothing to do with it, because that lesson was dealing with end time prophecy. What we're doing with this one is we're going into time past, hence the forming age. The former age is the age that's before our time. And one of the times we're looking at is going to be the medieval times of Russia. Okay, so I'm going to show you this picture. Okay, and you're going to probably be shocked, but that's the whole reason for this lesson. Okay, so this is from Pinterest. I was looking into Russia and looking for images. If you saw the actual image that I used as a thumbnail for the Gog and Magog lesson, I was looking just for, really an ancient Russian picture that I could put as an icon. Of course, I could have put a modern day icon as well. However, it was for people to watch and figure out what was going to be in the lesson as well. And sometimes those ancient pictures are, a very good imagery as well. So as I was looking for imagery of ancient Russia or, former Russian, 17th century, 18th century or medieval Russia, I came across this image. And this image is of as you see here, a medieval Russian warrior of the 13th century. Okay? As you can clearly see, this is a so-called black man, as burnished brass as it was burned in the furnace. Okay? Now, how do we know that this is actually, an image, a proper image? Well, for one, this guy who's Russian, once Starenko, which is actually a Russian or a name that you would actually find commonly in like a Ukraine. Okay, and there are Ukrainians that are identified more as ethnic Russians due to the language that they speak. They speak more Russian than Ukrainian language. Now, he said that this is a Muscovite, not Russian. Okay, so he made it very clear. This is clearly a guy that comes from that region based on his name. So he would know this history, know this information. And this imagery for him signifies that this is not an actual Russian. Okay, so when we did that, when that lesson was done on Gog and Magog, as it was revealed according to prophecy, that it is the modern day Russians that will be leading that charge. And as you see, this man is not considered a Russian to this man who is Russian, more than likely, just based on his name. So he knows that this is not a Russian, this is a Muscovite. So now we have to look into what is a Muscovite. Now remember, what we've always said is that the Israelites ruled in the Middle Ages, which is about 1,000-year period from the fall of Rome, right, to the Renaissance period. This was considered the time frame in which Esau was not in full rulership or control. He was subjugated, or he was basically a vassal to other people, particularly Israelites, especially in places like Europe. Now, when you go into the history of these different regions, as I was doing some history and going into it, I was finding out that there were actually two sets of people that were in the area known as Russia. Okay, and the Muscovite were not considered what is known today as a Slavic people. Okay, they are considered the original inhabitants of what is now today known as Moscow, which is where their kingdom had started from, where the empire had started from, which we'll go a little bit deeper into. So what we're going to do is with this, as you see here, there's a website. Okay, now this is where that image is coming from. I'm going to show you what it says. And as you see here, it's the same one, medieval Russian warrior, 14th century. Okay, that website, as you saw, was the El Greco miniatures. And we're going to go to the different images. As you see here, this is not in the US dollars, clearly, right? Meaning that you can buy this. Someone can buy this. Actually, there's one more left. Okay. So what it is that there's one more left, and people, okay, that are in the know, they buy these things. Okay, they will buy these type of things, and they will have these in their homes, and they'll say this is a medieval Russian soldier, this is a Muscovite, because they have some of these icons. A lot of their information and stuff like that was burned down. A lot of images were burned down. A lot of books were burned down during the time of the rise of the Soviet Union. Under these different rulers, like Stalin. Like Joseph Stalin, he had a lot of books burned, a lot of images burned during that time. Some survived, and they were able to later compile it into books, which I'll show later. Okay, but many of them were destroyed. This is another angle of the image. Okay. Now this is their depiction of a medieval Russian soldier. Okay, not a Renaissance. Okay. So now we're going to go into the Wikipedia. This is the word Muscovy. Okay, remember, he's a Muscovite. It says Muscovy, former principality in central Russia that formed the nucleus of the modern Russian nation. Because later, Moscow, after the Edomites took over Moscow and Russia, they made that their home base. All right, for their what would later become their Russian Empire. Okay, and you can look up the Russian Empire. I've actually, even in the other video, I suggested brothers watch it. When you watch these histories, a lot of times they'll do regional history but they won't talk about the different people groups that were there and when one was ruling and when one took over. Many times they don't even know that because, again, for many people, people identify a place with a people only versus a place dealing that could have had different people groups there over a period of time. So it says from the French Muscovy, okay? It says from modern Latin Moscovia, old name of Russia, from Russian Moskova, Principality of Moscow, because that's where it is. It's actually Moscow. All right. And as you see here, related, a Muscovite. Okay. So now let's go ahead and go into the dictionary.com. It says here that a Russian principality from the 13th to 16th centuries, of which Moscow was the capital. Okay, now look at this, 13th to 16th centuries. We go back to this image again. We see that this warrior, okay, was around the 14th century. Okay, it says an archaic name of Russia or Moscow. Okay, go ahead and click on Moscow. Let's see if there's anything in here. No, they're just going to tell you what it is today. But it says Russian Moskova, okay, or Moskva, a city in and the capital of the Russian Federation, which is what it's called now, capital of the former Soviet Union. It says here, also called Grand Duchy of Moscow, and of course we just came from definition number 1, which we're going to go back to this. This is Muscovy again. It says also called the Grand Duchy of Muscovy, a principality founded, all right, circa 1271 and centered on the ancient city of Moscow. He says its rulers gradually gained control over neighboring Great Russian principalities and established the Russian Empire under the Tsars, okay, which later happened. Okay, these are, now remember, there was a different set of people that took over later in what is known as the Renaissance period, okay. So we're going into what a Muscovite is in this particular case, which is clearly not a modern day Russian, as said by a Russian himself, okay, on the comment section. So this is the Wikipedia, and it's the same thing you're going to see. The Grand Duchy of Muscovy from 1263 to 1547. And then later on, you have the reign of the Tsars, okay, that came after that. So let's go into the Grand Duchy of Moscow. As you see, the Grand Duchy of Moscow is what? A Muscovite Russia. Okay? This is a Muscovite Russian. This is the time of the Muscovite Russians when they were ruling. A Muscovite Rus. Because remember, in the last lesson, Gog and Magog, I talked about Kievan Rus. Okay? So when you have Muscovite Rus, that's a different set of people or different rulership than what was known as the Kievan Rus, okay, or the Grand Principality of Moscow. It says here that was a Rus principality of the late Middle Ages centered on Moscow and the predecessor of the Tsardom of Russia in the early modern period. You see, the early modern period, okay, let's go into that. Because what is the early modern period? The early modern period is known as the what? It says the early modern period spans the period after the late Middle Ages of the post-classical era 14 to 1500s through the age of revolutions. Now, look at when it started. It says, although the chronological limits of the period are open to debate, the reason why it's open to debate because you have various sections of Europe in which Edomites took down earlier than others, and therefore their dates can differ by a span of 100 years. However, the beginning of what people call the modern period is usually going to be the fall of Constantinople, which is actually has a relation to the Muscovite Rus. Because after the fall of Constantinople in 1453 by the Ottomans, who were Edomites, okay, they were Edomite Muslims that lived in the Caucasus that converted to Islam. And then they later on took down other empires around them, including the Byzantine Empire in 1453. This is literally what many would consider the beginning. This is around 1,000 years after the fall of Rome. This is considered the time period of the beginning of the modern era, okay, which is also known as what? The Renaissance period in Europe, okay? So the Renaissance period in Europe is really around this time. That's the beginning of what is known as the early modern period, post Middle Ages, okay? Because remember, the 1500s would be the 16th century. Hence the reason why you see the time frame, okay? Meaning by around the end of by the time the 1600s came, or right around 1600, that's when a lot of our people had already really fell worldwide. One of the last sets of European thrones that fell before the modern period was going to be the throne of King James, okay, which was in the early 17th century or the early 1600s. Okay, so this period was known as the Renaissance because it was what? The Renaissance was the rebirth of the Greco-Roman culture, okay, and that's what it really means. In fact, we'll just go into that for this. Oh, and by the way, let me actually read this. I forgot about this. It also includes the end of the Crusades, okay, which is an attempt by our people, along with some Edomites that had joined themselves unto our people to take back the Holy City, okay, which, you can watch that in the movie called The Kingdom of Heaven, which is a fantastic movie, one of my favorite movies of all time. It's a very good historical piece, and if you like history, that's a movie that's a must watch. It says the age of discovery, especially the voyages of Christopher Columbus beginning in 1492, but also Vasco da Gama's discovery of the sea route to India in 1498, and ending around the French Revolution in 1789 and Napoleon's rise to power. Now, let's go into this Renaissance real quick, and I have to do some timeline stuff for the sake of this lesson. So it says the Renaissance is a period of European history marking the transition from the Middle Ages to modernity. Okay, we'll open this up too, and covering the 15th and 16th centuries, characterized by an effort to revive and surpass ideas and achievements of classical antiquity. Okay, now what's classical antiquity? We'll deal with that. So we'll go ahead and define these two: modernity and classical antiquity. Now remember, this is the time when Esau rises to power. This is actually rises back to power. This is actually prophetic because it's actually in the Bible, these things. Okay, now the word Renaissance literally means rebirth. It literally means rebirth. Okay, in fact, let's see if there's a way for me to, let's go ahead and do this. Let's see if they're going to give us the true meaning of this. So this is the etymology. It says Renaissance, great period of revival of classical based art. What's classical art? That's Greco-Roman art. Revival. When you revive, you're bringing something back to life. Okay, some of you brothers may even be thinking of certain scriptures in your head when you say revival or brought back to life. Okay, there's certain scriptures concerning that with these people. And learning in Europe that began in the 14th century. It says here, literally rebirth. Okay, usually in a spiritual sense, from the renastre, grow anew, be reborn. Okay, then it says here, be born again, rise again, reappear, be renewed. So be born again to rise again. Okay, pretty sure that y'all are thinking of some things. I'm not going to get into some of those precepts, but if you just think about the beast that had a wound and was healed, came back like from its deadly wound and came back and exercised the powers of the beast before it. That's what it's talking about. That's what they did. They had to revive it when they came back into power. Okay, and they had to revive what was known as the Greco-Roman era, which is they call the classical era, which we're going to get into. So we're going to go ahead and go back. Let's see if we can get back to that. Okay, so it says here modernity, and it's the same thing. They just have different names for it. It says attitudes and practice that arose in the wake of the Renaissance in the age of reason. Because remember, they're not dealing with the Bible at this point. Okay, they're dealing with what was known as the Enlightenment period, which goes back into the Roman period. Okay, of the 17th century thought and the 18th century Enlightenment. Some commentators consider the era of modernity to have ended by 1930 with World War II in 1945 or in the 1980s and 1990s, and following the era is called post-modernity, okay, which is heavily deals with technological advances and also non-traditional roles and things like that. Says let's see, and okay, here it is. Depending on the field, modernity may refer to different time periods or qualities. In historiography, the 16th to the 18th centuries are usually described as early modern, while the late 19th century corresponds to modern history proper. And that's because you have what is known as the Industrial Revolution that happened after that time. So by the time you get to the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, that's when they known as what the Industrial Revolution time. So let's see here. And they have various things. They talk about the different political movements, okay, that occurred during that time, which is a different way of ruling. Back in the Middle Ages, you had kings, okay, you had different people that were in actual seats of authority that ruled over massive populations with people that they either ruled of their own people and or people that they conquered and took over their lands and territories. Okay, so now we're going to go into the classical antiquity. This is what they're rebirthing. And the classical antiquity that they're rebirthing is what? It is known as comprising the interlocking civilizations of the ancient Greek and ancient Roman, known as the Greco-Roman world. Okay, so this is what they were bringing back to life. Okay, when you go into that word for Renaissance, again, it tells you to characterize the effort to revive and surpass ideas achieved of classical antiquity. Okay, they were focused on bringing back Roman culture, which is clearly they've done pretty well with that. I'll give them props on that. They've actually not only have they brought it back, they even surpassed the wickedness that they were promoting beforehand. Okay, and this is one of the reasons why it's interesting that the fall of Constantinople brings back Greco-Roman thought. Isn't that interesting? I thought don't they always try and promote that the Byzantine Empire were just nothing more than just Greek Christians? Okay, and I do have an icon lesson on the Byzantine Empire as well. And I'll add this into the icon series so you can watch them as well. Now, for the sake of time, we'll just keep it moving. And we're going to go back to the Grand Duchy of Moscow. And we're going to show you this right here. As you see, it says here that the Demonins Muscovite. So that's basically a name of somebody, all right, that is actually from this territory during this time period. Okay, and they had an absolute monarchy, and they were known as Muscovites. Okay, their religion was Russian Orthodox Christian, which is actually based on what was being taught by the Byzantines, because the people that were from the Byzantine Empire, which were Israelites that ruled that region. Okay, going back to the fall of the Roman Empire, when Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, became the prominent way of worship for a long time, for basically around 1,000 years, if you look at it, how long the Byzantine Empire lasted. Okay, so they were the ones that went up there and actually taught the people that were the Muscovite people, made sure that they were up to par with their learning of the scriptures. We'll put it like that. So as you go on, you're going to see the history, and we'll get into at least one or two of these people. I believe have their information on. This is the Kremlin right here. Okay, so that infamous Kremlin was actually created in the late 15th century, and they just kept on updating it over the years. And let's see. I don't think one of the pictures was here, so yeah, it wasn't on this one. So you can always go back and read this, just showing you the time period that you see it ended in 1547, which is basically what? Around the time that the Renaissance period would have been kicking off. It's not a coincidence. Okay? It's not a coincidence at all. So let's go into this. So now, this is an actual depiction of a regiment of Streltsy during the Muscovite era. Okay? So this is during the Muscovite era. This is the depiction of the people, all right, that were the Muscovites. Okay? And as you can see, just looking at the images, these clearly are not your traditional Russian men. Okay? So these would have been medieval men of these times, clearly warriors / bodyguards. You can see that they got, they got swords. This guy got a long sword. He got his sword right here. This guy's playing the trumpet. Okay. You see their hats. Okay. You see their cannons right here. And as you can see, this man is depicted differently than them. Look at this guy. All right, compared to this guy. Look at this guy compared to this guy. Okay, so who looks like they're more important in this picture? It clearly looks like these men in red and in these nice coats look more important than this guy who appears to be a peasant. Okay, and he's, let's just, we know exactly like what this is. This is medieval period. Okay, brothers and sisters. Look at this guy right here. Okay. Let's see if we can go any bigger. Oh, beautiful. So look at the size of this. Look at this guy on the horse. Okay. Now this guy right here with the blonde beard, more than likely he is probably part of the regiment. Like I said before, some of these men, basically you had Edomites that were around that same area. A lot of these places in Europe, you had Edomites that were around there, but they were not in power. But they would also join military campaigns. Sometimes they would actually get a level of prominence of something that they're able to do, but they would not be rulers. It's no different than the society that we're living in today. After all, Esau has perpetual hatred for us, and yet you'll see our people that are near him too. But this is a reverse. This is a trading places situation prior to the modern Russian period. Okay? But you can clearly see that these men are so-called black men. I mean, this is not Jake painting this, by the way. Okay? This is so-called white people that are painting all this stuff, making these images. They're showing you what it is. Okay? So we got to understand what it is and what it isn't. Now, I'm going to go ahead and go to another one. This one right here is from Ivan Rozansky's, okay? Says SCA Adventures, an overview of my research, adventures, and artwork projects in the Society of Creative Anachronism, okay, the SCA. And this right here says Russian Historical Costume for the Stage, Parts 2 and 3. This right here is a depiction of that they had of Ivan the Terrible. Okay, and look at his clothing, man. This is crazy. Look at his chain. Okay, look at the medallion piece. Okay, so-called black man. Okay, you can see he's got his little scepter things, little rod. He's got his rings. Look at it, 4-finger rings, man. Now show me where you got Edomites rocking 4-finger rings. All right, remember. 2 manner of people shall come out of thy bowels. What is manner? Manner is short for behavior or mannerisms. Okay? This boy got 4-finger rings like he Slick Rick. Okay? And I'll show another picture. Now, this is this guy right here. This is him. Okay? This is the man that put the image up, bro. Let's go ahead and read this. Says today's post is a continuation of my translation of Russian historical costume for the stage, a book written in 1945 by N. Gilarovskaya. This work has extensive research into historical clothing from the Kievan Rus and the medieval Moscow periods with many source images. Whoa. With many source images. Whoa. Says so the Kievan Rus is not the same as the medieval Moscow period. We already showed you that you had the Muscovite Rus and you had the Kievan Rus. Okay? It's very important to understand this. Okay? Now, we'll go ahead and skip down a little bit. And as you see here, look at how he titles this. Now, mind you, this is from 1945. This is from, I guess, a professor at Moscow, Leningrad. Maybe they started doing this stuff again right after World War II, I'm assuming. And the guy put out a book with the images and the depictions and the way that they dressed in different time periods, because it's very clear that there was a different style of dress during the Muscovite medieval period versus the modern Russian period. There was a transition in the style of clothing, which happens whenever another group of people take over. Okay? They usually may adopt a little bit, but they'll switch it up because they have their own style. All right? So, it says the Russian historical costume for the stage, Kievan and Muscovite Rus, okay, which is two different time periods. Okay, and you have a traveler who talks about how the people looked. Now, who knows exactly we'll see where he went to, I believe. Yeah, okay, here it is. Among the scarce information about the people, because remember, information became scarce because so many books and images were burned during the time of Stalin. Okay, and also you had an iconoclasm that was going on, but during the time of the Renaissance period, even all the way in Russia. But we still have some stuff that we'll show you as we go on. It says among the scarce information about the people who lived in the land between the Dnieper and the Volga rivers, a picturesque depiction of these ancient Rus is given by the 10th century Arab traveler Ahmed ibn Fadlan. Ibn Fadlan was the Rus who traveled on business to the king of the Khazars and attended the burial of a Rus nobleman. Okay? So basically, he traveled on business to the king of the Khazars and attended a burial of a Rus nobleman. And then he goes into how they looked. Okay, now mind you, we don't know if this Rus nobleman was an Edomite or a Jake, so very hard to kind of figure that out there. However, they do go into how the men were built, their physique. Okay, now very interesting thing, they said that they wore no jackets or kaftans, but only cloaks covering one arm and the other one free. Each man armed with an axe, a sword, and a knife. Okay, oh yeah, they were like palm trees, rosy and beautiful. It says their swords are flat with grooves and Frankish. Okay, women wore on their necks rows of beads, the number of which indicated the wealth of their husbands. And so we don't know exactly who this was there. However, we know the king of the Khazars went with this Arab traveler, okay, during that time. And the Khazars are basically the people who today, some of the Khazars, most of the Khazarian people, we'll put it like this, had already by this time, at least their nobility or their ruling class had already converted to quote unquote Judaism. okay, by this time. So these are the people who later became known as the Ashkenazi Jews, who ended up moving into different parts of Europe. Of course, Ukraine, Georgia, not Georgia as a state in the U.S., but the actual country of Georgia. Places like Turkey, places like modern day Russia, Poland, Germany, so on and so forth, Austria, Hungary, all those areas. Okay, and that's a whole nother history and topic. So as you see here, they got the types of medieval Russian clothing, and they go into each one to have diagrams, okay, of medieval Russian clothing. I mean, down to shirts, pants, head dress, stuff they wore on their heads. You know, very interesting things. However, I cannot, these images, you can't click on them, unfortunately, to see the imagery. But I'm pretty sure if you Google each one of those, you can see more. Now, let's deal with this picture right here that this man put up, okay? So the next one I'm going to show you, this is from the encyclopedia. And this is the same image right here of this man. Okay, this is Ivan the Terrible, who was the last king, all right, of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, or of the Muscovy. Okay, this is the same picture. Okay, it looks like it might have just had a different hue on it, but this is the man known as Ivan the Terrible, which is the same guy in this picture as well. Okay, clearly a so-called black man. Okay, four-finger ring like Slick Rick. Okay, you see his clothing. All right, his garment. This is a garment that would have been worn, by Israelites back in the ancient world, especially one that was of nobility or royalty. In addition, you would actually see the same type of clothing among the people that were in the Byzantine Empire as well. Okay, which is where they got some of their style from, plus a lot of Byzantine people that were Israelites, okay, moved up to Russia during the Middle Ages as well. This is actually well chronicled and documented also, okay? And if you look at some of the images, I have an image of an icon of one of the king rulers, Nicephorus of the Byzantine Empire, clearly a so-called black man. I actually have more images of him as well, clearly depicted as a so-called black man. It's like not even up for debate, really. Okay, so we're going to go and we're going to actually look into a little bit of his history. It says here that, see that, and they're writing this stuff, but this is stuff you can actually find on other places. This article is terrible. Now, I had to show this image because the other image was confirmed by the other guy who was doing his history on Russia. But he was born in 1530 into a Russian royal noble family, which I'm going to have to actually go back to this one. In fact, we can go here because it actually shows Ivan the Terrible. Okay, which is his reign. He actually was born before that, appears, but let's see. Yeah, so he was born 1530, and he started reigning at 17 years old. Okay, I mean, he was clearly, he was a Muscovite. Okay, now what they did is, and I'm showing you this is iconoclasm. So that same depiction of this guy, this is the new construction. So they remade how they said he looked like, but they said they did a forensic facial reconstruction of Ivan IV by Mikhail Gerasimov, who was an anthropologist, lived, I believe, until like 1970, and he would actually make redepictions of like former Russian nobility and other people groups in and around there, and of course they were trying to change the image of what he was originally depicted as. Okay. So that's what they did with that. That's why you see these newer pictures. Look, this is from 1897. Okay. Because by that time they had already took over. Okay. These artists, these iconoclastic people, This is exactly what they do. They make redepictions. This is called iconoclasm, when they make these new depictions. And this is the reason why this face was reconstructed on this image more like that, even though that's not the original depiction of him. Okay, this is a very common theme as you go through this information. All right, so what we're gonna do, go on to this one. Now, this is actually from the University of Washington, by the way, which is a prominent university. And here they have the development of the portraiture in Muscovy. Okay, and it says formal painting in medieval Russia was first and foremost confined to religious themes. Okay, so most of the painting was religious themes, which I'll show you how this is known, because there actually are books out there that show that this is actually true. Okay, the activity of painters and mosaicists consisted in following as closely as possible what were considered to be divinely inspired model, a substantial repertoire of which was available in Byzantium. Okay, because they were following after the Byzantine Empire, who was their brethren. Okay, at the time. Okay, this is during the Middle Ages, of course. Painters were to follow in the acceptable iconography for multi-figured compositions and standard representations of individual saints. Creativity was not a measure of artistic success. While no early examples have been preserved, there is a reason to believe the books with sketches of standard iconography were available in their absence. Presumably, a beginning artist would learn the iconography during his apprenticeship to master painter. Certainly, a great many, if not most, of the icon painters of medieval Russia were themselves monks. Okay, so we're talking about painters of medieval Russia. Now, so they're letting you know that a lot of the paintings that were done were basically based on people that were believers, or basically depictions of people that were in the scriptures. That's essentially what they were doing a lot of. Okay, so what we'll also do is we'll go down to this. Okay, because this is a long read and we cannot do all this for the sake of time. So I'll go ahead and read this right here. Muscovite princes, diplomats, and courtiers obviously made the acquaintance of Western portraiture. We know certainly that by the time of Ivan IV, okay, Ivan IV, who was who? We just went over by him. Okay. This is Ivan IV. Now, mind you, this is a new depiction, updated depiction of him. It is, okay, not the one that we saw here. Okay, so remember that this is the original depiction. That's the new one that they made later. All right, let's go back. It says, we are certain that by the time of Ivan IV, which is Ivan the Terrible, when he was fishing for an advantageous foreign marriage, he ordered his ambassador to obtain a portrait of the prospective bride. There is little evidence, however, that the portraiture became acceptable in Muscovy before the second half of the 17th century. Now look at this. We'll go ahead and look at this image and then we'll read what it says. Okay? This is an image around 1600 in Russia. It says we can begin to speak of the icon portraits possibly by 1600, while the versions we have tend to be copies made no earlier than the end of the 17th century. It is argued that they are based on originals, which may have been painted long after the deaths of those depicted. It says one example is an icon portrait of who? Tsar Fedor Ivanovich, the last of the Moscow branch of the Rurikids, who died in 1598. So this is the last of the Muscovites. This is the portrait of the last of the Muscovites rulers. Okay, he's the last of that branch. Okay, a branch means a particular tree line of people. Branch meaning lineage. Okay, that's basically what is depicted at. When you look at a family tree, those lineages that pop out, those are branches. Those lines are known as branches. Okay, so he was the last of that branch. It's the reason why we keep telling you around this time in many places, by the time you get into the late 16th century, early 17th century, we were basically done as a people as far as from a rulership standpoint in many places in the world. Okay, we were already taken down. Our empires or kingdoms have collapsed, and we're being targeted for slavery and oppression and death. Okay, that's what was happening, and that's why you see that image. Okay, so this man, Tsar Fedor Ivanovich, okay, so-called black man, clearly, who was known for his piety and was venerated, if not actually canonized, as a saint. The main thing which would distinguish him from an ascetic saint is his jeweled collar. Otherwise, we see the typical iconographic facial features, including stylized almond-shaped eyes and a somewhat pinched ascetic mouth. Okay? So we're getting a lot of the same type of images. It's very obvious. Okay? So we have to understand what are they trying to show here with these images. Okay, now we're going to go into these Russian icons. As we know, we talked about when some of these images were created. Okay, 14th to 16th century. This is Russian icons. Okay, a hard book to find, and if you find it, it's very expensive. This is from the History Museum in Moscow. We got another one. This is Russian Icons hardcover. Okay, and it has it here. This is another version of it. I believe this might be a different language or a different version of the same type of book. It says that traces the development of Russian icon painting from its initial heavily Byzantine influenced style. And then we go here and got here the icon by Kurtz Weitzman. Okay, and this is the book. I've actually seen images shown before of this book. These are all books hard to find. Look, $350. Okay, this is Russian icons, over almost $3,000. Okay, and this is in Virginia. Why is this book almost $3,000? What is in here? Okay, you see that? Who's that on the top left? Why is he looking like a so-called black man? What's going on here? Okay, look at that. That's why the book is so expensive. What images are in here that these books are $400 to $3,000? Okay, this is the French version of the same, one of the other same books. Okay, they got various images. And some of these were painted over, which we'll go into. But look at the middle, the top. Okay, and I'm going to show you exactly what they said about some of these images and what they did to change the depictions. Okay, as you see here, says here that Saint Simon was a priest of the Jerusalem temple who recognized the Messiah in the Christ child. Look at the child. Look how dark he is. Okay? Look how dark this child is. Now you wonder why the book is $400. Okay? Now I'm going to show you a couple of videos. Just play it. In many of these images, some of these images were actually repainted over, and which they're going to admit to. I'll pull up a video that says that some of these images were actually painted over later. Okay. As you can see, the men are dark skinned in a lot of these images. And you're going to notice some of these images probably in some future lessons. I'll actually get some of these images that were not depicted on here so you can see exactly like what was actually shown, because some of the stuff they didn't have time to really paint over it to quote unquote lighten it up. In fact, yeah, this is it right here. So you have this right here, which this one, if you actually look at the zoomed in version of it, it's like crazy apparent. Like, because some of these pictures were a little bit smaller, they couldn't do anything, but look at this right here. I mean, look how dark. Okay. Okay. I mean, and that's one of the reasons why they didn't want to have, because some of these images are just too obvious. Some of them they were able to do some work with and paint over it. Okay. Look how dark he is. Now tell me, if he was lighter, they could have made him as light as these other colors that they have on here. Why was he so brown? Okay. Because they couldn't do anything about some of these. They couldn't repaint over them. You could tell that some of these pictures are too fresh to have lasted to be like this 700 years later. So some of them they'll be able to change up some parts of the picture. Some of them they can't, like the smaller part where you have the baby Messiah right here, like ones like this. Those are harder to change because of the size of the child. But you can change this. You can see what they would do. They would do these strokes. Okay, they would do these strokes on the hair. That's what I noticed when they do a lot of the iconoclasm. They would switch it up, and you can see they have these like interesting strokes after they would paint. But some of them it's hard to do because you can't do it on a smaller image. The smaller the image area is, the harder it is to work with. So what they'll do is they'll just work on this area. Okay? They'll work on a bigger head, a bigger area that they can change and represent. Now look, we're going to go back into this. Look how dark the angels are. Okay? I mean, look at this. This is Russian icons now, by the way. This is what they were drawing. This is the Muscovite people. This is who they were depicting the disciples and the saints as. So-called black, brownish people. Okay, let's just keep it all the way real, because we're clearly seeing lighter colors elsewhere. Okay. I mean, the angels is black, like so-called black. I mean, it's crazy, right? But this is what they were trying to hide. I got one so heavy, I'm actually trying to get the actual source of it, but it actually goes into the lineage of the Messiah, going back to Adam, and it has all the depiction of everybody in his line, and all of them are so-called black people, bro. It's like basically like looking at Matthew chapter 1 in succession. It's literally like crazy, but I have to find out what book it's from to source it properly. But it definitely looks like one of these Russian icon paintings. Okay, you can see that they can reconfigure this. Some of these they can reconfigure because the images are so big, and they have artists that are very good at doing that. Now look at Peter and Paul. Clearly so-called black men. Okay, which is what they would have been over there even during those times. Okay, I mean, look at the men in and around. Looks like the disciples. I mean, look at this guy on the right. It's very clear. Look at the child, okay? The quote unquote baby Christ. Okay? So let's go to another one. and I had to put it on mute. There's music in the background, but I just don't want it to mess with any copyright issues. In fact, I can actually speed this up. And some of these images, I actually noticed that some of these images, I noticed them from other areas. They were not really from the. I don't know if they were from the same book, because they're actually various Russian icons book, but like even this Moses one that you saw earlier, this one you've seen a lot. If you've been around for a while, you probably seen this on social media and stuff. But this one may have been a new one. Like this image, he probably compiled the images from Russian icons image pictures, but this one right here would have been more than likely made, in our time, okay, just based on how smooth the painting is and how it doesn't look worn out, okay. So I will admit that some of these were inserted in. However, these are ones that you can actually find in the Russian icons book, because I've seen some of the images presented by brothers that had the book and actually filmed it, right? So this right here is clearly a Russian icon, because even the style in which they depict the men and the way they put their names on each side. Like this is I believe Saint Nicholas, I guess. And then you can see, look at the Messiah right here. The depiction of the Messiah crucified. Okay, he's as dark brown as the wood that he's crucified on in this image. I mean, you can't get around it. In fact, let me go ahead and make it bigger. Okay. Look at this man. This is a so-called black man. These would have been Muscovite monks, priests in the Middle Ages that would have been drawing these things, as we read. Okay? I mean, this is another one. Clearly a so-called black boy or child. Okay? Clearly so-called black man as well. This is an angel. This angel is bringing the image, all right, of the Messiah, and in this image, you can clearly see he has cornrows. Okay, he would have had cornrows. If he had his hair like this, he would have had it braided. There's clearly some Kawhi Leonard style cornrows. All right, and that's what they're depicting him as in this image. This is an angel right here, as you can clearly see with the wings. Right, clearly so-called black people being drawn in this image. These are Russian icons, by the way, again, as you see in the title. And they're in some of these books that I showed you as well. Now, as you can see here, you can clearly see that they tried to blonde color the head of the child. You can clearly see that there was some iconoclasm going on with the child, especially. Okay? As you see in many of the other images, the hair was black. This is a depiction of King David, okay, in one of the Russian icons, and this is very, this particular writing and the style of drawing is very, very consistent with the medieval Muscovite Russian iconography. Very consistent. Right? Look how dark he is. It's very obvious. They actually have another depiction of King David elsewhere as well. Okay. This is like a metallurgy as well. Okay. And look how dark he is. I mean, we can't get around it. These are images found in these different books. Okay. This is clearly also a Russian icon style. They would usually put the halo, okay, around basically if you were a saint, they put like this little halo thing around your head. So this woman is more than likely a patron. Remember, they were going off too, okay? They were going off in the Catholic Western Christian Church, and in the Eastern Orthodox, they were going off too. All right, trying to venerate different people as saints, but they were doing it in remembrance of some of the people who were either did good works or may have died for the cause. But as you clearly see, this is clearly a so-called black woman. I mean, let's just keep it real. Clearly a so-called black man. And don't know what language this is, but more than likely this is also a Russian icon, because again, they like to do the halo thing, which is a very clear sign of, what the Russian iconography will do. This is another halo thing that they did. He's a clearly so-called black man. This is an angel, okay, with which what appears to be the saints or the disciples. This is another angel. This is the angel Gabriel, clearly a so-called black man, okay, looking like, dark-skinned Michael Jackson, okay. Also has what? The halo, and then the two names on the side, which is, this would be Angel Gabriel, is what they wrote here. And as you can see, Archangel Gabriel was written at the bottom right here. Okay, this is the Russian, but right here they just later put that. More than likely, this is either like in some kind of an art gallery as well. Okay, so they also, if somebody would go to Moscow, you would read it in Russian or you'd read it in English, because English is one of the most common languages spoken on the planet, even by people who speak other languages. Usually their second language will be English. Okay, this is a depiction of the Messiah. However, this appears to be a newer depiction, but this one could be a remake of an older depiction. Okay, and if you look at this man, remember that Yahawashi began to preach around 30. This looks like a 30-year-old man that's around 30 years old. He also would have been a dark-skinned man as well. Okay, but this is written in English. It's possible that they could have been another image in Russian, and somebody put the English words in here and basically redrew it, okay, of the same image to make it look like how it probably would have looked today. Because as the images fade, as you see, the other ones were fading, but this could be a remake that somebody made of an older icon. But I have no idea. It does have some similarities to some of the Russian icons or the Byzantine icons that I've seen in the past. This is Moses. Okay. This is Saint Benedict, Saint Josephine, Augustus. Okay, two more believers. Okay, in fact, we'll go back to that one. All right, see? Dark skin, right? So-called brownish people. So-called black people. I mean, it's very, look at this. That's the Madonna and Child, which is a big idolatry that also has happened back in time past and in today. And then this is clearly here, so-called black people. I mean, look at the heads right here. You see the people. This guy over here looking like a Mari Stoudemire. Okay. You can also see the heads of these people right here, but you can barely see their eyes. You can see the head right here with the nose and the eye poking out here. You also see the crowned men. Okay. This is a woman that appears. This is definitely a Russian icon. Okay, as you can see here, they got the angels. In fact, we'll go ahead and zoom in. Okay, just so you can see it better. I mean, this is beautiful, right? And if you look at the images, the angels, so-called black people, all through. This you can't even get around it. Can't even get around it. Okay? There's a reason why the Muscovites, the medieval Russians, okay, painted and depicted the disciples like this. Okay? There's a reason. There's a reason why that man, okay, said that the guy, the medieval warrior, was a Muscovite and not a Russian. Okay? We'll go ahead and go here as well. This is part 2. It's definitely in Russian. You can see the words. Okay, look. Believe this is from the, I don't know if this is from the Spanish. This is actually from a book, I think it was called like Spanish Illustrations or Manuscripts. which is where this image came from, depicting the angels and the Messiah. Okay, remember he wore a garment that was green like a beryl. He has the book. He's able to open up the seal of the book. Okay, you can clearly see the halo. Okay, you see the angels to the right and to the left. Okay. Let's speed this up for the sake of time. I mean, look at that. We'll pause this real quick. Clearly Russian. Look at the words. Again, these are Russian letters. These are the letters, the type of letters that Russians would have been used, which they got a lot of that from the Byzantine. And you can see these are so-called black and brown men and women. Really so-called black men, so-called black and brown men depicted in these pictures. It's very clear that how they depict. Now, we're not saying, by the way, we're not saying if somebody looks like a so-called white person, they're not an Israelite, or looks like a so-called Asian. We're just showing you the iconography of what they're depicting the people as, and this is basically, what it was, would have been during their time, and even during the time of the disciples as well. Because it's understood back then, there wasn't this big campaign in the Middle Ages to make, to change up what was already true. Okay, you only change up whatever is already true is if you're trying to basically, erase history through what's called iconoclasm. Okay, right. This right here is a Russian icon. It's in one of those books that I've seen this before. This garment is actually in this particular series of pictures, they have the different people that are in the scriptures, and they have a depiction of them, and they have their names. So this right here is actually Moses. This right here that he's holding it, by the way, is the burning bush. It's just showing, okay, this is the burning bush, and here's the law. And giving him the law. Here's the burning bush, and look at him. Okay, he looking like Colin Kaepernick right here. Let's keep it real. He got a whole fro. Okay, and this is the depiction of Moses in this particular instance. All right, more so-called black people, so-called black angels, black and brown peoples being depicted again. Okay, this one right here was well, let's go back. Moving kind of fast. Yeah, so Saint Moses the Black. So this is like some of the newer depictions. I've seen that one before. Now this one right here is clearly, another Russian icon. Looks like another Russian icon depiction. We still got the halo right there on the angel and on the man and on the child. Okay. And this is what they don't want the people to know. If the masses knew that the medieval Russians depicted Yahawashi, who the world knows as Jesus, as a so-called black man like here, and his disciples as so-called black men, they would lose their mind. I mean, many Russians right now would probably go crazy if you showed them this. Okay? This is the Black Madonna and child, as it's known, which would be, Mary and the child Messiah. However, that has been a big stumbling block because they actually, today, Talmudism is heavily promoted. This is actually kind of like an ancient depiction of what they would have been doing with Tammuz and Semiramis, his mother. Okay, so there was some parallels of the corruption that was going on with some of our people. Okay, so that's it with that one. Now let's deal with what they said here. Okay, this is I know it's a pretty long lesson, but for some of you brothers and sisters that have bared through this time, I was doing this because I didn't want to have to go back and show some of this stuff. I didn't want to put it into pieces. So you can watch it piecemeal, but some things do have to be explained for the sake of context. So as you see here, you're going to see that the rare Russian icons in display 13 years ago in Moscow. Okay, now one of the reasons why they probably were doing this is probably because by the time you get to 13 years ago, a lot of Jakes were putting up a lot of information on YouTube, including some of these Russian icons. They were getting these books and they were showing these pictures. Okay, so they have to go back and control some of the narrative by doing this. And you're going to hear what they're going to say. And I believe that's the reason why they put these on display, because they could have been done it, especially since the fall of the Soviet Union. They could have been done it. Why do you wait now to 2009, okay, which would have been 13 years ago, to start putting it up? So we'll go ahead and play it.
Icons dating back to the 14th century brought together from private collections across.
Now remember, from dating back to the 14th century, these are private collections that were given to the Moscow Museum. Now, mind you, those books that I showed you were written long before this was put together. So these are various private collection stuff plus stuff that they also had. Okay?
Russia. It's very beautiful. It gives you goose pimples.
Okay? And you can see it's a very same Russian icon style. Some of these they couldn't repaint over. Like I said, some of these paintings are hard to repaint because you will destroy the original one. And some of the images surface area is so small. But look, the halo, the same color style background, very similar. Even the clothing that are depicted on them, very similar. Okay? These guys think they're slick, man. They think they're slick, but we already got the Russian icons, man. The Most High didn't expose them.
It's a remarkable exhibition.
It's an exhibition which feeds the senses. Everything is so good.
Look at the background. So people think we capping when we showing these pictures. Okay? Look at the background. Okay? You can clearly see that these are so-called black men. Okay? They can't even get around it. I know that they're sitting there, their head is scratching. Okay? Some of them are being blown away by this imagery of medieval Muscovite Russian society and what they were depicting the Messiah, the angels, and the disciples as. Okay? And the ancient men of the scriptures like Moses. Okay?
Grey outside at the moment, and here suddenly it's a feast for the eyes.
And it's a feast that marks.
Okay? Very clearly so-called black men, bro. You can see it from afar. Okay? Now you're gonna hear what they're gonna say.
100 years since religious icons started to be recognized as works of art. Before then, they were mainly viewed as religious objects, often left blackened over the centuries by the passage of time and added layers of paint.
So basically, some of these images were blackened over time, and that they also had to add layers of paint. So when they added layers of paint, what type of paint were you thinking they were adding at times? They were adding paint that was iconoclastic, which is the breaking of an image to change it into a wider/lighter image. Okay? This is a very common practice by Esau Edom, okay, where they want to change the images of the likeness of our people that are in the scriptures to their own likeness. Okay?
When we learned how to remove the dark layers, we discovered underneath an overwhelming...
So they would remove the dark layers, man. At least they would attempt to. Because they couldn't believe, like, damn, how dark... Wait, how do you have dark layers, but then these other layers are light? Okay?
To such an extent that it shocked Andre Matisse, who was in Moscow at the time. He said, it's here that artists should come to learn to paint, not to Italy.
But today, only a small number of these masterpieces remain. Most were destroyed during the Soviet era.
Yeah, because you see here, this is the Messiah. This is clearly a so-called black man in the picture. And like I told you, that during the Soviet era, they were destroying these images. Okay, during the time of Stalin and these different Edomites that were mainly so-called Jews. These were so-called Ashkenazis. Okay, And they were the ones that were ruling during the Soviet era. They were the main people that actually created the whole doctrine of socialism or communism. Okay, that goes Karl Marx, Lenin, Trotsky. They were all Ashkenazis. Okay, now look at this depiction. Okay, that they have of the Messiah in this particular picture.
These icons are the survivors. If museums hadn't saved them, they wouldn't exist today. There are 50,000 icons in Russian museums. Before, there were millions.
So they had millions of icons, man. They couldn't even see. They had so many icons. They couldn't even destroy them all, or repaint them all, bro.
But now the future of this part of Russian heritage is up for debate. Are the icons better
Okay. And I know that they can't believe how dark these people
held
are.
by museums, or should they be returned to the country's churches?
Okay, some of these were painted over, like we stated before. So let's go ahead and close it out. This is 1 Maccabees chapter 3 and verse 48. And laid open the book of the law, wherein the heathen had sought to paint the likeness of their images. Okay? And the context of that is when you go into the book of Maccabees, when the Edomite Greeks who came out of Macedon were actually going around conquering the world. And when they came to Jerusalem, they laid siege to the city and basically got a hold of the book of the law, which we had our own iconography as well, where we actually put depictions of the people in the scriptures inside of our book. Okay, this is a very common practice in the ancient world, where books will also have imagery on the side as well. Okay, and so they changed the image through what was known as iconoclasm. Okay, which y'all can look up. Okay, and this right here is just a series dealing with the Russian icons, dealing with the Muscovites, dealing with the medieval Russian period, showing you the icons of their period during the time of their reign, in which they depicted the Messiah, okay, Mary, Moses, King David, the disciples, as so-called black and brownish people. Very obvious with froze. Very obvious with the style and dress of clothing, including going back to the latter rulers of the Muscovite people prior to the Edomites taking over Russia. So hopefully this is edifying to you, brothers and sisters. And again, I want to give all glory and praises to our Heavenly Father Yahweh, and we do so in the name of our Lord and Savior Yahawashi. Grace and mercy be bound to the hopeful elect scattered throughout the four corners of the earth. Shalom.